Like many of us, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been enjoying the Republican clown show. But she recently took time to speak to The Independent about some of the criticism that she's actually received by fellow Democrats. Interesting. So now, she had told the publication that the chaos that we're seeing in the House GOP right now, the inability to choose a leader, has served to highlight how reasonable she and other progressive Democrats have been. And this is specifically relating to intra-party Democratic fighting, which we have not seen very much of. In fact, she says, The Independent writes, throughout much of her time in Congress, the self-described Democratic Socialist has heard herself and other progressives described as unreasonable. Former Representative Stephanie Murphy, for example, even called the coterie of Democrats the, quote, never enough caucus during negotiations about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and passing Build Back Better. Yes, never enough. How dare you ask nicely for things that could actually help the working class? You darn Justice Democrats, how dare you ask for these things like, childcare and paid leave and things that could actually help people. Now, look, unlike what's currently going on in the House, where Republicans all agree on policy positions and are trying to get favors, goodies, and also just to show people how much they despise Kevin McCarthy or don't trust him, AOC points out that many of the debates she was involved with fellow Democrats were about policy positions. And I think that's the important part here. I think it's really far more difficult to get concessions on policy than on rules changes and committee assignments. Although, to be fair, it's actually not a bad strategy to get those rule changes and committee assignments. I think those are very, very important. And so, that said, speaking just off the House floor on Thursday evening, Ocasio-Cortez told The Independent, quote, I think it just highlights how extraordinarily bad faith those accusations of progressive unreasonableness are, even when they come from our side of the aisle. I think whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or Independent, what this whole episode really indicates and shows us is, again, just how bad faith and some substanceless the argument and accusation is that progressives are just as bad as these insurrectionist Republicans. All right, so look, that's a fair point. Let me note that the Democratic Party can be pretty vicious against progressives, especially when they decide to ask for policy positions that, go above, I believe, what the donor class wants. And the reason that a lot of these establishment Democrats are very harsh against progressives, vicious, is because you have the donor class. Again, that supports these establishment Democrats. If they did not, then they would not get these donations and not get the airwaves blanketed and wouldn't get reelected. So not only that, but look, the donor class doesn't want things like Medicare for all. So that said, there's a massive policy disagreement inside the Democratic Party that does not exist in the Republican Party. And that's why these fights are different. You see what I mean? Progressives, for example, they do want Medicare for all. Establishment Democrats do not want Medicare for all. Progressives don't get massive amounts of funding from health insurance companies and special interest groups, while establishment Democrats do. Pharmaceutical companies. So that said, progressives, the squad has sided with establishment Democrats a lot. And a good example of that is, yes, they had helped to crush the rail strike. In fact, Socialist Alternative had tweeted a totally fair criticism of the squad on the recent, bill that allowed the government to remove the ability for rail strikers to go on strike. Remember, these are people that do not have a single day off, a single sick day. They said this: if the 7 sick day resolution fails in the Senate, which I haven't heard of it passing, they'll have done exactly what Biden did, betrayed workers in favor of the bosses. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Ro Khanna, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush all voted to impose the contract that rail workers had rejected. So, yeah, that's a vote that I absolutely disagree with. And when it comes down to it, AOC is correct in the criticism against him from establishment Democrats is in bad faith, because they happen to side with the Democratic Party way more, especially even on these very important votes, while not pushing forward some of the more progressive stuff. That said, she continues by saying that when we make demands and pull the line on something, it is based on policy and substance. And she's right about that. And something that, frankly, usually every time has a path of possibility. We offer a plan B and we look at the reality and push as hard as we can. But we also have an understanding of what is best for the country. So, again, have they taken votes that I don't like? Yeah, of course. And we should be allowed to criticize them. And I think that's fine. And I think that's healthy. What is not criticism, constructive criticism is, Fraud Squad. That's a good example, right? And just completely, ignoring any of the positive things that they have done, not just for the country and some of the good votes that they've had for the country, and just throwing it all away, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? And saying, you're 100% betrayed everything that you said you stood for. No, I don't believe that at all. Although there are definitely valid, excellent criticisms that you could levy, especially when it comes to votes. And so, don't misunderstand me. There are definitely very constructive ways of criticizing your representatives, and I believe you should do that. And then there are also examples of just insane bad faith criticism that I think should be avoided, because, again, that is the thing that does make some progressives look unreasonable, or people who purport to be progressives make them look unreasonable. But again, you have to be measured in your response to it, or else you're just not going to be taken seriously. We should be able to criticize them without being labeled Trump-tards and Putin puppets. No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that's the bad faith coming from the establishment Democrats, that, will take any criticism towards Democrats as to be, you are siding with Republicans, you are siding with right-wingers. And again, there's bad faith from some on both sides. And I hate to see the both sides, and to do the, both sides do it. And that's not exactly what I'm trying to do, but you do see some of that coming from both camps. Now, that said, do I believe that AOC should have pushed more on policy? Of course. That's one of my, things that I'm not as thrilled with AOC for, honestly. I do think that she should be able to push a little bit harder to fight as much as she can. And as far as I've seen, she hasn't done quite as much fighting as I would like, personally. Okay. Now, that said, at the same time, I understand the idea and need to be strategic about the fights that you take. And so there are people out there who have seen what Republicans are doing right now. Okay. And they're saying, well, this is what the squad should have done. So that gets into the force of the vote thing specifically. And I know a lot of people have been asking me to talk about this. So as a tactic, I think force the vote is valid. Because if you're withholding your votes for concessions, yeah, that can be a very smart and effective strategy. But of course, it depends on what you're asking for. So look, let me give you an example here. McCarthy has given out actually quite a few concessions, and he's flipped some people over. Now, it's not enough, but he has flipped some people over. Now, that said, these concessions are about seats on committees, term limits, and even enacting specific border policy legislation. Okay. Another one allowed any member to force a vote to remove the speaker at any time. And look, in this case, yes, those concessions are doable. and actually do give a ton of leverage to a very few members of a minority here. This is the so-called Freedom Caucus, right? Now, forced to vote was about withholding a vote for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House. Now, the ask for that is, or I should say the main ask was, we should get a floor vote on Medicare for all in the House. Now, that's a floor vote that everyone knows would have failed. If not in the House, definitely in the Senate. And so, at the end of the day, it would be performative. And those who supported that say, well, yeah, we knew it was going to be performative. And so we could find out who's actually against it. Well, if you know a vote's going to fail, why wouldn't you vote for it for the positive press and PR? And so there's arguments, again, that you can make for this strategy, for this tactic. And obviously you could make the massively moral argument of we should do everything we can to fight for Medicare for all, right? That said, if you're doing it for performative reasons, and if you're pushing it for performative reasons, and then you vote for it for performative reasons, then you're not really doing a whole lot. It's not accomplishing anything policy-wise. And with the people who, for example, Harris was said that she was in favor of Medicare for all. She wasn't. You also had Representative Tulsi Gabbard at the time, who had run for president in 2020, also saying, oh, I'm in favor of Medicare for all, and then not being in favor of it. And so there are plenty of people who take that more popular position because it is a popular position among progressives, and then will just lie about their support. And again, if you know a vote is going to fail, whether it be in the House or the Senate, then yeah, if you're a dishonest person, you would vote in favor of it and then say, oh, look at me, I supported Medicare for all when it counted. And so that kind of defeats the whole purpose of putting them on the record of being against it. Do you see what I mean? So it was a flawed tactic, even though forcing a vote itself actually would make sense depending on what your ask is. So that said, right? I keep mentioning Republicans are united on policy. Democrats are not united on policy. I'm not sure what forcing a vote would have accomplished, but this is the discourse that never dies. It continues to be brought back up. Now, Republicans, by the way, these members that were challenging McCarthy have been given major concessions that would have been very meaningful. And that's really the key difference. Getting a performative vote is not the best use of the tactic when you can actually get more leverage, more committee assignments, etc. And so you go for the wins that you can get that will make the most difference going forward. And when you see that path, be aggressive about it. And my main criticism of the squad, again, is that I don't see them being as aggressive about those things. And too often we do see a desire to go along, to get along on things that I think that they could have pushed a little bit harder on. And that's my perspective. Okay. So now, overall, though, she is correct that she's not at all unreasonable in the Democratic Party. And I actually believe that she should be a bit more unreasonable, but just a little bit, enough to get some concessions. That said, when it comes to Republicans, we can see that it's obvious that they're a clown show. And this entire thing has petty written all over it. Now, one last thing, too, by the way, on force of vote. So we see the media reaction to what's going on in the House right now. I am, I guess, part of the media. But you see, like, for example, establishment media, CNN, MSNBC, they're having a good time. We're all having a good time. We're laughing at the clown show. Because it's entertaining. It's funny. It's a circus, right? Now, Democrats do this. Guaranteed. They try to force a vote on anything. Not just for Medicare for all, but if they had tried to do a fraction of the things that the Republicans were trying right now, the tone would change. It wouldn't be, haha, look at the clowns. It would be, just as AOC was saying, Look at these unreasonable progressives. Look at what the unruly. They're terrible. You are destroying the country. You are withholding help for American families right now on the line for your personal little thing that's not even going to pass. Look at these terrible progressives. What are they doing? How dare they? So that's another thing. Look, us on the left, we tend to minimize the impact of, at least in my view, mainstream media. Mainstream media, again, is the gigantic elephant in the room. We know it's a problem, but we still underestimate the impact that it really does have. It is a major driver of the conversation. And so it would be to our benefit not to underestimate the power of media, especially on the left.